Valgus is when the knees fall inwards. This is often something that is seen in people with a tendency to have flatter foot. Not always, but it is something you can see. So when the foot is flat, usually there's more pronation, so falling inwards. Knees also will follow that. There's also varus, where the knees fall outwards, a little bit like the cowboy stance.
How do you spell that? Varus?
V-A-R-U-S.
Yeah, okay.
Varus and valgus. Good.
Okay, so varus is
Varus is when it's outside.
outside.
Valgus is inwards. This will basically just tell you, and it will give you information as to the challenge that the person will probably have in standing postures. The person with a valgus will very, very often have their knee always kind of falling in like this. So that will be the person that you will have to correct again and again and again at trying to bring the knee back into alignment. There's also some cases where some people have a naturally slightly twisted tibia on their knees, and so basically they're constantly like this. Their kneecap is still facing forward, but the foot is turned outwards. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
So basically, like this, my kneecap is still facing forward, but my foot is going outwards. This is a rotation within the tibia. So this is something that sometimes can just not be corrected, even though you're like, try to bring your foot back in. And some people sometimes, when you correct them, and then they're all naturally like this, then you're like, can you try to bring your toes back a little bit? And they're like, but that hurts my knee. Like, oh, okay. So structurally, keep in mind that structurally we're not all built the same. So when you take the time to look at someone's legs when they're standing in a neutral position, if their neutral is something a little bit like this, where the kneecap is still pointing forward, but the foot is going off to the side, it is possible that for them, instead of having the femur in line with the second and third toe, it might be for them to have it aligned with their big toe instead. So maybe they won't be here, but they probably will not be here either. So those are things to look at. And this is only something you will be able to see and observe when the person is standing in a neutral position.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go
How
ahead,
do you
Mama.
know that's not coming from the hips that the feet are?
If the kneecap is pointing forward, there's no chance it comes from the hip. Because if it comes from the hip, the kneecap will roll with it. Yeah, because if it comes from the hip, is the whole femur turned out. And then the knee also will be looking outwards.
That's why I'm the student. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. But those are valid questions.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So if you're trying to correct the student and you see and it says, you know, okay, my knee hurts when I do that, would you say, can you stand? Can
Yeah.
you just stand
Yeah.
in a neutral position for
Absolutely.
me just for a minute and then
Absolutely.
and then try to
It's
do it there?
also helpful when you're starting your classes or like before doing the first standing postures, like sometimes you may have done a couple of sun salutations which don't necessarily give that much of work for the knee or for the ankle to really be looked at that much. But when you do come up from your sets of sort of sun salutations or something, maybe take always like a second to just invite people to center themselves in their feet, to feel their toes. And while you do that, while you do your speech of like, okay, standing up and like trying to find a neutral shape in your spine, whatever, you can take the time to look at the knees and feet and see how people are naturally positioning themselves. And so you can see people that will have that tendency. And when you remind them, okay, try to bring your feet back into alignment. And if you see someone that basically starts like this, and then as soon as they bring their foot in, their kneecap turns in like this, you know for sure. That's the person that you will not overly emphasize, like, bring your foot back in. Bring your foot back in, because you may actually do more harm than help. Because alignment, again, is not a set of rules. I mean, when the broader alignment cues that you've received are not God-given rules. They are to be applied depending on what body you're referring to. So if a certain body has a different shape, then you may have to adapt it to that body. And so keep in mind that the broader cues are good, though they may have to be adjusted depending on who you're working with.
Puis excuse, comme
Oui.
je comprends l'ajustement en position neutre. Moi aussi, j'ai des problèmes de genoux qui grimpent. Et j'essaie de les placer. Mais quand je suis en guerrier 3, par exemple, ou en dancer, j'ai toujours mon pied qui
tourne un
va à
peu vers
l'extérieur parce
l'extérieur.
que sinon je tombe. Puis ça, c'est
Euh,
Si je vois ça chez quelqu'un, est-ce qu'il faut que je modifie?
Pas nécessairement, parce qu'encore une fois, c'est l'idée, si je suis dans mon guerrier 3, tu vois là, ma rotule, elle va peut-être un petit peu plus regarder vers mon gros orteil.
Mais
Au
ça, je
lieu
peux
d'être.
pas. Je peux pas faire ça.
Ben, ça, c'est pas si pire. C'est pas si pire. Mais tu sais, si le pied est vraiment complètement comme ça, then again, if my kneecap follows, it means that I have to use my external rotation. Think that you're going in flexion and you're weight bearing. If you keep too much of a neutral rotation, some people will have limitation right there. And so basically you end up compressing something here to keep the alignment. So it's okay to let it rotate. As long as the foot is not 90-degree rotation, usually most people around 15 degrees, they'll be fine. If it's about 30, 45 degrees, then it gets a little bit excessive. But to get enough space to just remove that compression within the 15 degrees is usually still good. Donc quand tu regardes à ton pied, je suis sûr que ton pied doit pas être pas mal plus que ça à peu près. Ça, moi, c'est quelque chose de tout à fait acceptable. Tout à fait. Ouais. Good question.
I have the opposite problem when I'm doing half moon or
They turn in?
Turn in slightly, like maybe 15 degree. I'm always kind of trying to correct it, but
The internal rotation can be sometimes a different problem. It's not necessarily because there's compression. It's either because there's an excessive amount of flexibility, so hyperlaxicity, which is your case, or sometimes some people will also be a lack of stabilization. So sometimes the muscles within the hips or within the rest of the legs are not necessarily giving enough support, and so when you internally rotate, you tense up all of the ligaments around the leg and you create more strength. So basically you will rely more on the joint stability. So you lock your joints into position. You want to find that little bit of compression to find more stability. If it's done without a sensation that there's anything pinching, there's usually not necessarily danger there. Though again, if it's because there's too much flexibility, you want to really encourage people with hyperlaxicity to work more in a muscularly activated state instead of just sinking into their joints. This is really just a really common thing that I've seen. When people are too flexible, especially like in postures like lunges, they will go extremely, extremely low, and you can, like, even though you're like, oh, it shows that they have no pain, though they're hanging in their joints. Definitely hanging in their joints. And like, I can maybe give you a little bit of an example of what it would be to hang in my joint. So basically here, I'm still supporting myself. I don't feel compression anywhere, but if I just let myself go here, all of a sudden, I can see some of you, your eyes are going like, but it's not that different. The only difference here is right away, I start losing my core, my hips start shifting off to the side, I'm starting to have weird rotation and torque within my pelvis, whereas if I just do this, I lifted like only 3 centimeters. And yet, the difference, I have a lot more alignment within my front leg, I feel my back leg a lot better, my hips have returned back into position. So it's small. It's small, but for very flexible people, those will be very helpful tools. So when you have people in your class that can do every posture and go even beyond, that's what you will challenge them on. So you can still be a useful teacher even for someone with great flexibility. Even though you can't do half of what they're doing. You still have the external eye to give them those little pointers. Because further practice to be sustainable, they also need someone to just hold them back just a bit. Just a bit, and you will be helpful in that sense. Good. Just make sure that I have gone through most of the things. Good. Okay, so let's continue with the knee. So specific to the knees, there's a few injuries that you may come in contact with. One very frequent that will happen in yoga will often be torn of meniscus or ligaments surrounding the meniscus. Those are usually happening when we're going into a lot of seated postures where there's a lot of torque within the knees. So as I was talking before, the unsupported lotus where there's no action going. This in itself is not necessarily a terrible place to be. Then again, bear with me here. We're trying to find ways to prevent injuries, and so in people that are trying to attempt a lotus pose that don't naturally have the joint flexibility, if you cannot very comfortably come here and stay here, then you should definitely not practice like this. You would want to practice maybe first here, just to the edge of the knee, or maybe like if you start just here into this kind of double pigeon where you eventually just stack the shins and then you really keep the feet flexed. This is a really good way to get used to feeling the activation in your legs, the external rotation within your femurs, while you protect and prevent your knees and ankles from going into their full range of motion. Those are really good ways to prevent. Usually injuries like meniscus tears and torn ligaments within the knee are not always something that will require surgery, though if the torn meniscus has what we call a flap. So basically it's a piece of the meniscus that constantly gets caught in between the femur and the tibia. It means that they constantly get pinched, and that is not fun. Definitely not fun. And in some cases, it's not only getting pinched, it's also getting stuck. So basically, sometimes you have the knee that doesn't want to bend more than this, and then you have to kind of go, ouch. Or doesn't want to extend all the way, same thing. If it's something that is constantly being pinched, what tends to come from constant rubbing? Inflammation again. But this is inflammation that will not come in one shot. It will come over time. And inflammation in the center of the joint will lead to something much more, much less, enjoyable. It's torn, it's torn cartilage, basically osteoarthritis, where the cartilage of the knee slowly wears down. And in this case, when there's already inflammation, it means that it makes it even faster. It will accelerate the degeneration of the cartilage around, because then the surroundings will become a little bit more acid. Acidity is extremely bad for your joints. So an extremely heavy diet in red meat with lots of alcohol will tend to make it much more, it's a better environment for your joints to slowly destroy themselves. But I mean, when you do eat too much meat and you do drink too much alcohol, you do slowly destroy yourself. We can all agree on that. Because, I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with loving meat. All in proportion. So everything should be done always respecting a certain level of quantities. Just like exercise. If you exercise too much, you're constantly injured. If you don't exercise enough, then your body doesn't get any movement. Another injury that you may see people with their knees is the ACL torn, anterior cruciate ligament. There's two ligaments, there's the anterior and the posterior. The posterior is almost never torn, it's very rare. If it happens, it's usually from a very terrible kind of injury, where people will actually get their knee kind of smashed backwards. You never want that to happen. It fortunately rarely happens, so you will almost never see that. The other one that you will see is the anterior cruciate ligament, very often in ski accidents, when you're going and then the ski goes in a different direction. That's because the tibia basically is twisted outwards while the femur stays in position. It just does what it does. And so basically, often it will be what's called a triad. When that happens, it's often not just the anterior cruciate ligament, there will be also the collateral medial ligament of the knee that will be torn, and often a part of the internal meniscus also will get torn, especially in the small ligament that makes it more stable with the tibia. You don't necessarily need to remember all of this, though. If someone tells you, I have had my ACL torn, then you know that right away, oh, there probably has been a surgery, because if it's torn completely, it's almost always fixed. Otherwise, they really can't very much walk or do anything. It's like they could, but with a very heavy brace with metal rods in it usually. So almost all the time, the person that will have an ACL torn, they will need a surgery, unless it's a partial tear. If it's a partial tear, then sometimes they will just let it repair on its own.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Somebody who has had
An ACL
Like
tear?
big damage, like
Mhm.
ACL and PCL and.
Wow, that would be bad.
When you're doing yoga, and you have a lot of positions where you go on the right side and your left side,
Mhm.
the person can do one side normally, but then the other side not. Would it be better if the person, if you find a variation for both sides, or is it okay for the person to do the position on that side and the side that they're not capable to do the variation?
The thing is that
Because you want to
that
balance both
person
sides.
could do both sides. The only thing is that she would have to have the tools to be able to do both sides.
Mhm.
And usually there's one side where that person could hold all of her weight on her own, and on the other side where she would probably have to work with a chair. Because all standing postures can be done with a chair.
Mhm.
The only thing is that the chair needs to be often boosted a little higher up. So they will be able to still take a bit of weight on their own to use a little bit of muscular activation, but not enough to create or to challenge the injury that they've had. Because the thing is that they're still walking, I guess, at this point, right? They still do a bunch of stuff. When they climb stairs, do they climb with both feet?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
my husband, he does it, but sometimes it would just
The knee kind
let
of
go.
gives.
So
Okay.
he always has to be aware that sometimes he's walking and then he just kind of, so you see that
Yeah.
he's walking and then you see him go, and then he continues, you know,
Mhm.
like,
So is he wearing a brace?
just to do activities. He
Okay.
doesn't
Okay. So
do it on
basically,
a-
for
on a
walking,
daily
he's
basis.
good with.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are usually people that have had also fairly long rehabilitation. So usually lots of physio and lots of different work with specialists. Is that the case?
Well,
Pretty
was that
much,
the
yeah.
accident was when he was young?
Oh,
Pretty
so they
young?
never.
So he did at the time, and then he fell off the stairs,
Oh.
and then he kind of had the accident again.
Very
So
young.
he had a cast for a very long time, and he did physio and everything. But for many years,
Mhm.
you see different doctors, and they're always like, oh, don't do this type of exercise, or you have to force your muscles, and you have to do.
Oh.
But he just wants to be able to strengthen the leg and do, normal like yoga and stuff
Mhm.
like this, but without damaging, because it is painful, like.
For sure, if he knows he's going to yoga class, something that can be helpful is basically foldable, like small stools or things like this. Sometimes can be used if he knows he's going to yoga class, and because basically there's also empowerment that you need to give your students. If you see
Yeah.
that someone has very intense limitations through several traumas repeated on the same area in the body, then they eventually will understand that whatever kind of activity they decide to do, there will always be limitations. And how can we palliate these limitations is usually by having tools to help them. And so basically using a small stool would be a very good way to make that happen. Or a foldable chair. So most studios will have a couple of foldable chairs. They will often have also small stools that he can use. Hopefully they're the right height, but those are definitely things you could be using. I have been doing a lot of privates with patients in the early 70s that were completely ridden. There's almost not a single joint that there isn't something. And so basically every single posture had to be adapted. The first two practices were challenging because she had to remember, okay, no, it's true for that posture. And eventually what I was doing also is that I was challenging her on independence in her practice because she was very motivated at practicing. She was a very fervent Aikido practitioner, and Aikido, you throw people around and they land and they crash on the ground all the time. So even though they have great techniques, there's still an impact. And so she was at the point where she was like, I'm thinking of no longer doing Aikido because I understand now that it's really not good. Upwards. So basically when you bend your knee, there will be rotation available. But when your knee is completely extended, you can't rotate the knee. Basically ligaments are tensed, and when your knee is bent, they're kind of moving away from one another. And so there's room for rotation. But when your knee extends, the ligaments get caught into one another and they lock the knee into position. So that basically when you're standing, it's not supposed to rotate. It's not supposed to. There are very small degrees of rotation, but it's not supposed to when the knee is lengthened. That's why they call it cruciate, just because they make kind of a cross shape. They cross one another in the knee, in the center of the knee. Good. Good. So basically, for the counterindication, it's very similar to what we said for the ankle. All standing postures, always make sure the alignments are good. Make sure also that seated postures, knees are supported and they're off the ground. So basically something like Janushashasana. Look at the position of the foot. If the knee is sticking up in the air, maybe support the knee so that you make sure that there's also a sensation of anchoring both hips. In some cases, you may have to open up the leg a little bit more and keep the foot way more flexed like this. Those are ways you can adjust. Good. So